touch it, bring it, babe, watch it, turn it, leave it, stop, format it. Well, that's a weird text message. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Hi. Let's talk about Sinners. Again. I am about to jump this off with a declaration. If Sinners doesn't at least get an Oscar nom for Best Picture, then we know for a fact that the Academy is racist. Now, for some of you, that's not news. But for those of you who are shocked by what I just said, before you jump in my comments and write your paragraphs about why you think I'm wrong, at least watch the whole video. Hear me out. Also, side note, you should probably know that I don't argue with people online, but your complaint will be noted. Okay, so this is not a new topic by any stretch of the imagination. Not for me or the multitude of other much smarter, more well-spoken folks on this particular subject. The problem with the Oscars and their very obvious bias has been noted and documented probably since the very beginning. And that being said, me saying that the Academy is a racist institution shouldn't be all that much of a surprise to anyone in 2025. But for those of you that are still doubtful about that, I would like to take the time in this video to explain just how flawed the Academy system actually is. Now, I've talked about both Sinners and the Academy's obvious bias towards horror movies in particular in 2 previous videos already. And actually, you know what? For this particular video as well, jump over and watch the Sinners video. I do a more in-depth analysis of the movie itself in that one. But given that we're coming upon Oscar season once again, and there's been this weird uptick in certain media outlets snubbing Sinners in particular, I'm looking at you, Rolling Stone, and Golden Globes, for that matter. I mean, y'all know that Michael B. Jordan's performance was superior to Timothy Chandelier's in Martin Supreme, right? Sorry, Marty Supreme. My bad. It occurs to me that something has been dropped in the proverbial punch towards the campaign for Sinners getting an Oscar nod. And in my opinion, that is something that has been lurking for years. So let's take a walk down memory lane, shall we? With a little history of the Oscars snubbing films. Now, I know this is a little bit off the beaten path when it comes to the subject of horror, as that's the reason why most of you are even watching this video. But the thing about horror movies is that if you only like and watch them because of the gore and not at least acknowledge the fact that they usually tap into some degree of the social political nature of our existence, then I really hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're missing out on the big picture, a big part of the landscape at least. It's basically like you're going to the Grand Canyon and you're caught up in how big of a hole it is, as opposed to the actual beauty of it and how it was created in the first place. That being said, I believe that the biggest flaw of the Academy as a whole comes from the fact that it has too many people looking at horror the same way, like a big hole in the ground. And as it turns out, those people are mostly white men. And that's not conjecture either. According to Statista.com, in their most recent survey, which was in 2022, around 81% of the members of the Academy were white men, with only about 19% being, well, everyone else. And keep in mind, I didn't say that this survey was done in 1955. That was only 3 years ago. And I know just because the membership has only been mostly white guys doesn't mean that they aren't white guys who aren't well versed in all types of film, except for the fact that the movies that have featured too many POCs are usually not even considered. Oh my God, Ophelia. But what about 12 Years a Slave? What about Moonlight? Okay. Well, what about 2016's Birth of a Nation? Or Ganja and Hess? Or The Harder They Fall? Or Jungle Fever? Or Cooley High? Or New Jack City? Or Daughters of the Dust? Or 2021's Candyman? I could literally go on and fill this whole time slot up with movies that have been snubbed because there were too many people of color in it. And I'm talking in and outside the horror genre. These are movies that didn't even get a nudge to show up at the big party in Hollywood. And then we get into the issues, the ones that were nominated, you know, which I find it kind of interesting that historically speaking, movies with more than 4 black folks in it are more likely to get nominated if it just so happens to be about oppression in some way, shape, or form. I mean, sure, you've got your outliers like Moonlight, but I mean, come on, please tell me, explain to me in a PowerPoint presentation how it is that Halle Berry won Best Actress for playing a drug-addicted single mother instead of her performance as Dorothy Dandridge. Quickly, and while we're on the subject, how about how few and far between those wins are when they do come? A quick pop quiz. How many Oscars has Spike Lee been nominated for in his entire career? If you said 4 times in 3 movies, very good, you know how to use Google. Now, how many times has he won an Oscar in those times he was nominated? 1. This man has been making movies since the early 90s. Let me repeat that. This man has been making movies since the early 90s. But among the most egregious instances of this kind of bias is My Roman Empire, The Color Purple, a movie with an all-black cast directed by Steven Spielberg, a virtual god in the world of epic movie making. That movie got 11 nominations in 1986. Want to guess how many Oscars it got? Well, surely it must have gotten at least 1, right? Right? The Color Purple is the current record holder for the most Oscar nominations without a single win. And the biggest insult to that is that Out of Africa was the one that won for Best Picture. I don't even have the bandwidth to unpack that level of lunacy. And do not get me going about how this queen has been snubbed year after year after year. I'm saying her worst movie is like one of my most favorite performances of hers. I'm not saying that Strange Days is a bad movie. It's an amazing fucking movie. All I'm saying is that out of all the things that Angela Bassett has been in, it doesn't rank very high for me as her other performances, you see. But also consider that that is the bottom of the barrel for her. Her performance in that is iconic. And mind you, I'm only talking about movies with black leads or all black casts. We won't get into other movies starring other POCs. Like, I'm more than annoyed about how few of these movies have historically even been nominated. Like, why are we in 2019 before we got our first Middle Eastern Best Actor? Or 2022, we got our first Asian Best Actress. They have been in movies this whole time. Have they not? And the thing is, I realize that all of this just sounds like me being mad that my favorite movies weren't nominated. And to that, I just want to say that while my favorite horror movie of last year was indeed Sinners, I challenge you to watch that movie and then look me dead in my eye and tell me that it doesn't need some kind of recognition. But hey, Sinners is a layup, right? What about 2014's Sweet Blood of Jesus, which was Spike Lee's take on the Ganja and Hess movie? And also, by the way, nowhere near my favorite movie that I've ever seen. Like, it's got its flaws, but at the end of the day, it was true to the original vision in that it connected to African folklore and highlighted Black excellence in a way that was updated for the times. And not for nothing, but it was just as beautiful as the original, if not more so in some scenes. All I'm saying is that the Academy needs to stop being so scary about movies with a high number of POCs. The same way they need to stop being so afraid of horror movies. There's art in all genres. Why not recognize it? And with that said, I want to recommend 3 movies that were either made by POC filmmakers or centers POCs that came out in 2025. And these are movies that I personally would like to see get Oscar nods. First on the list is The Woman in the Yard, directed by Jaume Colette Serra, and starring Danielle Deadwyler, and it has an all-black cast. It's a beautiful and genuinely terrifying movie about a woman who becomes trapped by a spirit haunting her home. And it's a fantastic study of how grief can become an all consuming monster that destroys everything in a person's life. And I cannot recommend this movie enough. The performances of all the actors are so intense. The use of cinematography and lighting to distinguish between despair and well, the outside world is just freaking genius. And I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, but I will say that if you personally have ever been in the darkest part of your life where you couldn't see a way out of it, you're going to be able to relate to the main character in the decisions that she makes and what she ultimately does at the end. Also, trigger warning for this movie if themes of depression and suicide are too heavy for you. Secondly is 2025's Frankenstein, directed by Guillermo del Toro, who couldn't make a bad movie if he was in a coma. Now, if you haven't seen this movie yet, I seriously don't know what you are waiting for. The man had actual sets made for this film. And when I say actual sets, I mean actual sets. Like sets. Like, bro, he built this. He built this, man. The costumes, the callbacks to the source material, even the fact that Oscar Isaac is probably the brownest white man you've ever seen in your life is something that you end up readily accepting because his acting is just that good. Now, I realize that if anybody in this list is going to get an Oscar nom, it's probably going to be him, but a fun fact, he's only won 2 Oscars, and neither of them were for Pan's Labyrinth. Let that sink in. And my last recommendation goes to The Long Walk. Now, the idea of a movie showcasing a collection of teenage boys walking doesn't sound like a particularly scary movie or even an interesting movie. And for those of you that avoided this film because you thought that, I'm sorry to tell you, but you are very, very wrong. And yeah, okay, so this movie does have a white director, and it is based off a book written by one of the whitest dudes alive. But the casting is the standout. So most of the original characters in the source material were white, and in the movie, they were switched out for POC actors. And by the way, they do a phenomenal job, especially this cat right here. Especially him. David Johnson, who, by the way, is British, sports a Southern accent, but not like just any old Southern accent. Like, his accent sounds like it comes from a particular part of the South that his character comes from, and I know that because I have family members that sound just like it. But yeah, all 3 of those movies are great Oscar caliber films that should at least get an Oscar nod, in my opinion. Also, all of that being said, there was a recent article posted in the New York Times about how the Academy plans to focus on more diversity in the coming years. And I honestly hope that is the truth because, like I alluded in this video and my video on how the Oscars like to ignore horror movies in general, when the Academy leaves out certain demographics and genres, they are missing the bigger picture. And they're ignoring exactly how wide and vast the world of film really is. Filmmaking is as beautiful an art form as any other, and it really pisses me off when so much of it gets ignored just because of the biases of a select few. So yeah, clean it up, Academy, because you're missing out. So that's it for this week's video essay. Thank you so much for listening to me rant for a little bit. I post every 2 weeks, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to see my next post. With that said, see you next time. Bye.